I'd very much like now to hand over to Harley, and Harley's going to be speaking about the UK industrial decarbonisation policy and some of the work they've been doing around local industrial plans. So over to you, Harley. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Steve. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great, perfect. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. I'm the head of the business and industrial transformation team in DESNZ. So that's the team that essentially wrote the industrial decarbonisation strategy back in 2021. And my team, I suppose you would say, we originated the local industrial decarbonisation plans concept and secured the funding for it. And then we've been working with Innovate UK to deliver it over the last sort of 18 months or so. I think I'm going to just set the scene today by outlining as best as I can in sort of 15 minutes the UK's approach to industrial decarbonisation. And then I'll go on to explain a little bit about how the LIDP competition sort of sits within that sort of framework. Next slide, please. Great. So, I mean, first thing to say is that manufacturing industry plays a really essential role in society. Without industrial manufacturing, we would have no cars or the fuels to power them or the roads to drive them on. We wouldn't have medicines or food or the packaging that they will go in. It provides the raw materials and tools that really build the world that we see all around us. I think although the UK sector has experienced a decline since the 1970s, it still remains a vital part of the UK economy, accounting for about 10% of GVA and providing nearly 3 million good quality jobs across the country, which is about 8% of total employment. But industry, as we all know, of course, is a major source of CO2 emissions. In 2022, industrial emissions accounted for nearly 1/5 of UK's total territorial emissions, at 17% or 68 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Approximately half of those are concentrated in 6 large industrial clusters. These are geographical areas with large concentrations of industry, mostly kind of located in coastal areas. And they contribute significantly to regional economies, particularly along the UK's North Sea coast, Southampton, South Wales. But the remaining industrial emissions are found in what we are calling dispersed sites. And these are sort of industrial businesses that are scattered around the UK. The pie chart on the right there just gives a bit of a sense of the emissions share across industrial sectors in the UK. So you can see that oil refining is the biggest piece of that pie. And then it's iron and steel emissions, followed by chemicals, cement, etc., as you kind of go down to sort of smaller bits of the emissions total. Next slide, please. So I think UK's approach to industrial decarbonisation is a really critical part of the overall strategy to achieve net zero by 2020. As I say, it's about 1/5 of total emissions, so a big slice of the total. And to enable industry to realise this net zero transition, the government has worked and is working still to create an economic framework that incentivises decarbonisation, addresses a range of market failures, and supports things like technology deployment and business growth. To support industry in the transition to net zero, the government is developing a suite of policies to enable core areas of action, including on fuel switching, so switching away from fossil fuels to low carbon alternatives like electricity, hydrogen and biomass, to make improvements in resource and energy efficiency, and working to develop a self-sustaining market for industrial carbon capture and storage. At the core of the approach is a consideration of the needs of different industrial sectors and regions in the UK, and the technologies that are required to enable them to decarbonise. Great progress has been made to date. So industrial emissions have fallen 57% in the period between 1990 and 2022. So that's the black line on the chart there. But it's imperative that we maintain that momentum and continue supporting industrial decarbonisation to achieve net zero targets. Next slide, please. So I just thought I'd outline sort of some of the key policies that are in place. So I'd say the kind of cornerstone of climate policy for the four governments of the UK is the UK emissions trading scheme. So this is a cap and trade scheme covering heavy industry, power and aviation, and it covers about 25% of total UK territorial emissions. And it works by capping the total emissions that are available to sectors on a declining basis each year. It issues allowances within that cap, either by sale, at auction, or by free allocation, and oversees a market for trading allowances to achieve a carbon price. I think the idea here is that by putting a price on emissions, it incentivizes investment in clean technologies. And the cap will reduce over time in line with net zero targets. We're also planning to expand the scheme to bring carbon pricing to more of the economy as well over time. The Industrial Energy Transformation Fund is a really critical policy that we have. So that will provide up to 500 million to industrial sites with high energy use. And it's designed to help businesses cut their energy bills and carbon emissions by providing grants to invest in energy efficiency and low carbon technologies. And it also provides funding for feasibility and engineering studies as well. To date, the IATF has supported over 150 industrial sites in and outside of clusters, and every £1 of government grant is matched by £2 of private investment as well. So it's also quite important in terms of leveraging private investment into industrial decarbonisation. We're doing some work on low carbon products to establish a market for low carbon products. So exploring the role that standards, reporting, government and private procurement can play, and labelling can play as well in reducing the carbon and material footprint of industrial activities. And there's also been quite a lot of work up front to sort of establish the markets for CCUS and hydrogen, which essentially are new industries that didn't exist a few years ago. So you would have probably seen the UK announce a commitment to provide £21.7 billion of funding over 25 years to make the UK an early leader into growing global sectors. So that's CCUS and hydrogen to be allocated to the HyNet and East Coast clusters. And then something that's not mentioned on this slide that I think is kind of quite important and a sort of useful segue into LIDP, which is where I'll go next, is the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. So this was a programme that we ran between 2019 and 2024, working with Innovate UK. And this supported the development of low carbon technologies and infrastructure within the UK's largest industrial clusters. The challenge awarded 210 million to projects to develop comprehensive plans to achieve net zero emissions. It also supported some deployment of low carbon technology, and it also launched the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, or IDRIC, which does a lot of great research work in the industrial decarbonisation space. Since its creation, the challenge has delivered significant developments, including industrial cluster plans, which provided an understanding of the emissions and options to abate them in the 6 largest industrial areas of the UK. It supported 9 deployment projects. It's unlocked about £22 billion worth of investment that will protect and create jobs in key industrial areas of the UK. And IDRIC as well have developed 100 challenge-driven research projects and co-designed and co-delivered with industry. That's resulted in over 60 innovative new prototypes, processes, models, tools to accelerate industrial decarbonisation. So yeah, could we have the next slide, please? So yeah, as mentioned previously, dispersed sites represent more than half of the UK's industrial emissions, and so supporting them to decarbonise is essential for net zero. I think there's probably a perception when I speak to people that a lot of UK industrial decarbonisation policy is focused on the major clusters, and I think there's some truth in that. I think they've certainly been the crucible for industrial decarbonisation, and a lot of the work has started there, and I think that makes a lot of sense because of the kind of densely kind of co-located industry that you have in those regions and the sort of the emissions that come from them. But if you don't also tackle the dispersed sites problem as well, you're not going to meet net zero. So for that's the reason that the UK government created the local industrial decarbonisation plans competition, which has provided £6 million in grant funding to support dispersed sites decarbonise and reduce their emissions. And LIDP is really built on the lessons that we learned from the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. So I think what the IDC really showed was that collaboration is really critical, as industrial sites who wish to decarbonise can really benefit from sharing information and costs with neighbours, can gain access to larger pools of resources, can utilise local supply chains, and just really achieve a greater pace and scale of progress as they look to reduce emissions. So LIDP has supported 13 projects who have received grants sort of up to 800,000 each. And while there are kind of really big differences between them in terms of size and location and composition, they all demonstrate collaboration between businesses, government, academia, and other local stakeholders. The idea really with LIDP is that these plans will identify the decarbonisation needs of these clusters, and also specific investment projects to take forward. Final slide, please. So I think LIDP has been really great to watch, and think the clusters have made strong progress developing really great high-level decarbonisation plans. The clusters have all formed networks that enable collaboration and innovation. And through LIDP, local clusters have really built industrial decarbonisation communities, which can now centrally plan and advocate for connected businesses, including, bringing in smaller businesses that otherwise probably would not have been able to have engaged with government policy. I think LIDP's place-based approach has really enabled it to tackle regional variations in decarbonisation challenges and appropriate technologies. It's built collaborative place-based cluster organisations, developed bespoke plans that are suited to local areas. And these cluster organisations are really able to advocate for these with regional utility companies and government, and drive local engagement in industrial decarbonisation, particularly with SMEs. I think I'll just finish just by kind of highlighting some examples of progress that some of the LIDP plans have made, and I think you're going to hear a little bit more about some of these later, particularly Shoreham Port. So Shoreham have done some great work modelling energy requirements across the cluster in different scenarios. They've identified high impact decarb targets within the cluster, so transport. And they've done a huge amount of engagement and collaboration with 21 businesses, 157 SMEs. They work with the University of Sussex, and local government as well. North East Wales have identified the regional infrastructure requirements and priority locations for support. They've developed a package of decarbonisation pathways for the region. And they've done a lot of work advocating for the region with energy utilities, so HyNet, district network operators, on-grid connections and other things to access the shared infrastructure solutions that they need to realise their plans. Zero Carbon Oxford, they've taken a whole city approach to decarbonisation of their cluster. They've identified priority sectors, including automotive, processes, so indirect heat processes, barriers around grid constraints, and then the technologies that they would need, so energy efficiency, renewables, electrification, heat networks, for instance, to decarbonise their cluster. And again, this is a theme. They've conducted really extensive engagement with local communities and businesses, particularly with SMEs. They've held a range of interviews, 20 site surveys, and a range of site visits and workshops. And then just finally, North Kent have done great work mapping local industrial sites' dependencies within the cluster, and exploring industrial symbiosis, so the kind of interconnectedness of different sites within the cluster and how the waste products of one can be used as the inputs of others, which is a really, really interesting idea. Again, they've collaborated with local stakeholders, including councils, University of Kent, National Grid, and sites, and have conducted a detailed evaluation of options development for appropriate technological solutions, including private wire connections, biomass, biogas, steam, methanol, CCS, and hydrogen. So I hope that kind of gives a flavour of the kind of variety of work that's been done. I think what I would say is that LIDP was really designed at the outset to be quite broad in scope, and I think that's kind of reflected in the variety of plans that have come across, from sort of cluster plans for industrial sites all the way up to sort of entire countries in the Northern Ireland case, and then sort of city plans as well. So kind of quite varied, but intentionally so. I think they're all making great progress. I think this is the start rather than the end of the process. We very much see the value in this work, and I think our ministers see the value in this work continuing. And I think we would like to be in a position to support these clusters to move to the next stage of planning, whatever that be, whether that's sort of feed studies, for instance, so that we can actually move to a place where we start seeing actual, emissions reductions coming from these projects through infrastructure projects, or installing the technologies that they've identified on site. So this is the start of a hopefully a sort of an ongoing process. So I think that's all I'll say. I'll stop there. Hopefully that's helpful.